Dune, a book written in the 1960s, the era of the psychedelics, the very, very interesting period for science fiction, and one of the best novels ever written in this genre, in this space. I agree wholeheartedly with those sentiments that the Dune book is one of the best science fiction novels of all time. It is a must read, a must experience, and unfortunately, yes, it is the best and most proper way to experience Dune. None of the film adaptations have quite done Dune justice. We have the David Lynch movie, which released in the 80s, like the 84 or something, and it embraced the strange. It embraced the extravagance, the weirdness of Dune, and I absolutely love it for it. And I believe this might be my favorite Paul Atreides, this might be my favorite Fade Routha, even though we don't know too much about these characters. I like the way they look. I just like the actors. This is an excellent actor for Fade Routha. Just some guy, he looks very good. A very good-looking Harkonnen dude who just happens to be a little bit of a psychopath. And that works. It really was work. I like that for Chani. And, of course, this is one of my favorite actors because he was Agent Cooper in Twin Peaks, so that probably is just some bias seeping in, though admittedly the most proper adapted Dune Paul, the best looking Paul, at least for regards to being more accurate to his age, would probably be Timothée Chalamet. I like this actor for Paul. He is fantastic. This is Denis Villeneuve's Dune, which came out in the, I want to say 2020, 2021, or even 2019. It's very recent, and they made quite a bit of changes. I recently rewatched the two Denis Villeneuve movies after finishing Dune, so that I can actually re-experience these movies after knowing the full story, the proper story, the canon story of Dune, to see just how much of these movies changed things. Because prior to reading the book, my original and first experience to Dune was with the miniseries, and I still believe to this day that the miniseries is the best version of Dune to watch. It's the most faithful adaptation. It has the best Baron Harkonnen. Obviously, you can't really see him on here, but that's Baron Harkonnen's actor, and he is fantastic here. Obviously, we can't really portray somebody really, really, really rotund, but this man really portrays the cunning of Baron Harkonnen in the way that only he could. The Baron Harkonnen in this was more goofy, and he was very sickly looking. The book does not portray Baron Harkonnen as sickly looking with boils on his face and all sorts of weird crap going on. And it also did depict Baron Harkonnen as being bald and very pale and all of that stuff. And he was cunning and he was all that stuff, but he sounded almost flippant when he talked. He talked a lot. He wouldn't shut up. And the Baron that doesn't shut up is this Baron. He also doesn't really shut up here, but he's more goofy here. This is a Baron that both doesn't shut up, but also sounds competent and menacing at the exact same time. He sounds flippant, he sounds jovial at many occasions, and he also sounds like he's the smartest man in the room, thinking many moves ahead in a chess game, and he's trying to teach his nephew, Fade Routha, how to think like him, because he plans to have Fade replace him someday. He plans to put Fade on the Emperor's throne. Baron Harkonnen in the miniseries is fantastic. This is the oldest looking Paul, and I don't think we need somebody in their 30s to play Paul, which is why I do like Timothée Chalamet's Paul here. I think he does really good here, especially in part 1. I really like Timothée Chalamet's Paul in part 1, although in part 2, he really starts to fall apart. He really starts to lag behind in being a proper Paul, at least until when he drinks the water of life, he does become a much better character, a much better depiction for Paul, and I really liked that version of him when he gets to meet all the other Fremen tribes and speaks at the council, and that is a very great scene, a fantastic scene. He is fantastic there. But prior to that, when he's learning the Fremen ways, they kind of nerf him a fair bit. He would not have needed Chani's help to learn how to walk. He already knew how to do that. As the prophecy goes, he shall know your ways as if born into them. He shall know how to walk as if he was born a Fremen. He already knew how to do that. He was a little bit noisy, but Stilgar taught him, fixed him up. And that's one of the biggest gripes and problems I have with Dune, is what they changed with Chani. But we'll have to get to that, because there are so many changes that Denis Villeneuve did for these two films that if I talked about every single one of them, I would probably be here for hours and hours, and I just don't have it. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to try to stick it to just maybe 3 to 5 major points of contention that I absolutely despised in this, because I do think that these are good films. They're very well shot. The story that Denis Villeneuve decided to tell for Dune works for the story that he wanted to tell. It's not this story. It's not exactly this story. It's a good adaptation, but it is not this story. It is a different story that Denis Villeneuve wanted to tell, and he told the story that he wanted to tell very accurately, very professionally, very good. He was very good at telling the story that he wanted to tell, but it's not this, okay? It's a lot of these characters are not the characters in here. I'm just gonna go out and flat out say it. Chani, every single scene with her, outside of maybe her meeting Paul, the very start, when she meets Paul and says, I would not have let you kill him, or whatever, because she's in the shadows having her own weapon trained on Paul, while Paul was training his weapon on somebody else. I think it was Stilgar or something. And that's probably the only thing that was in the book. Every other scene, every other line of dialogue, practically everything else with Chani in these movies was not in the book. Everything with this character was made up for this movie. And while it's a good story for this movie, it is not Chani. It's a completely different character. I didn't really care for it. I'm sorry. I think it was an insult to the Chani that I got to know in the book. And I got to know Chani first with this movie, with this miniseries. And it is a 3-part miniseries, which is accurate to the book. This book is cut into 3 parts. The first part, which is all that ends with Duke Leto's death. The second part, which ends with, I want to say, Paul and Chani getting it on. They have a kid on the way, or something like that. It ends before Aaliyah. It ends before Lady Jessica gives birth to her daughter. And then part 3 has a 2-year time skip. It's a 2-year time skip. Rabban has been reinstalled onto Arrakis, and he's been trying to get a firm stranglehold onto Arrakis, and Paul has been training the Fremen. He's trained Chani, and they have their son together. Lady Jessica gives birth to Aaliyah, and she's been born conscious, so as an infant she talks. It's very, very strange, but you could use some CGI to try to do something with that, I guess, but it was a much better adaptation. All 3 parts of the book are portrayed properly in this, in 3 different discs, and 3 different stories, and 3 separate long film length episodes. And that's how you should have told this Dune story here. I don't think you could have told this story properly in just 2 parts. And Denis Villeneuve's plan was to make this a trilogy ending in Messiah, which I don't think is properly accurate. The book itself is a trilogy in and of itself. There are 3 main parts. All you have to do is adapt each individual part as each individual movie. That way you can have the time skip happen in your 3rd film and not have to worry about your time compression plans with just 2 films instead. That's just my theory, my suggestion. Okay. So the first major point of contention that I really did not like is what the Denis film did to Dr. Kynes. The biggest change. Now, I was introduced to Dr. Kynes in the miniseries, and I really loved the actor who played Dr. Kynes in this. He portrayed himself very well. And yes, Dr. Kynes is a dude. He's a dude in the book, he's a dude in this version, and he's a dude in this version. I don't know why they changed that. I don't know why. Yeah, there'd be plenty of great, fantastic women in this story already. You have Hara, who is Jamis' wife. They cut that from the film, by the way. You had the old Reverend Mother, who had quite a few major important scenes, which she was in here, but she didn't really have much to do. So she had quite a bit of scenes. Lady Jessica, fantastic character, one of the best characters, and thankfully, she is portrayed pretty well in these. Chani had quite a bit to do in this, but they completely changed that. Everything that she does in this book, she doesn't do in these movies. They completely changed everything about this character. I don't know why. And they changed everything about Dr. Kynes. Dr. Kynes is the son of the previous Judge of the Change. Dr. Kynes is the son of, I forget his name, starts with P. Kynes. I'm just going to call him Mr. P. Kynes. Dr. P. Kynes. Kynes Sr. How about that? Kynes Sr. Came to Arrakis, and he essentially went native. He fell in love with the planet, and he fell in love with the Fremen. He took a Fremen for his wife, and his son that he had with her is Dr. Kynes, that we know. The dude in here, he's half Fremen, half Outworlder. He was born into Fremen society. He was born into their ways. He is full native. He hasn't gone native. He is native, Dr. Kynes is. And Dr. Kynes took a Fremen wife, and his daughter is Chani. And right away, we could tell that Chani is mostly Fremen. She is 3/4 Fremen and 1/4 Outworlder. So she would look a little bit different from the other Fremen. She wouldn't be completely ethnically there. She does have a lot of the influence of her father, who had a lot of influence of his father. Dr. Kynes is the one who introduced the Green Arrakis plan into the Fremen culture, into the Fremen society. And, of course, the biggest insult here isn't that they changed Dr. Kynes from male to female. No, that's not really the big important problem. The big important problem is when we introduce Dr. Kynes in this movie, they introduce Dr. Kynes as Liet Kynes, as if Liet was their first name. This is incorrect. It's very incorrect. It's an insult. It's an insult. I just read this book, and most people who watched this movie decided to pick up this book afterwards because now they had a major motion picture and all that stuff, so they decided to read the book alongside the movie, and they would realize just how many things he changed. And I'm sorry, but Liet Kynes is not proper, okay? And you'll learn very earlier on in part 1 of the book that Liet is the name of a leader, a prophet, a demigod, depending upon which rumor you want to pick up in the city of Araki and the other cities on northern Arrakis. You learn that Liet is a leader among the Fremen. They speak of him very reverently, which means some of the Harkonnen might even believe that this Liet is their deity, their god. That's how fondly they speak of Liet, that they say, Liet willing, we will do this. Liet willing, we must ask Liet, blah, 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 blah. And so the Fremen are all about that, right? And the Harkonnen and the Atreides all think that they don't know Liet is Kynes. Nobody knows this. Paul learns that Liet is Kynes right before Kynes dies, basically. He learns about Kynes right before he dies. And it was Dr. Kynes' father who introduced the Green Arrakis plan. He planned to terraform Arrakis. It would take centuries of time, but he introduced the technology, he introduced the plant ecology, and all sorts of things to introduce plants into the desert to try to trap more moisture, to gather more moisture, to build more greeneries and oases and all that other stuff. He had planned to make of Arrakis a green paradise. And he said it would not happen in your time, it would not happen to your grandchildren's time, it would not happen to your grandchildren's grandchildren's time. But eventually, in about 200 to 300 years, Arrakis would be green. And he promised to them this, and it became part of their culture in a way. They adapted this Outworlder became a leader of the Fremen. And then when Kynes Sr. dies, Dr. Kynes, who was taught by his father all of the ways of ecology, he became the new judge of the change, he became the new imperial ecologist, he picked up everything where his father left off, and he became Liet to the Fremen. He was an even more inspirational leader because he was born amongst them, so he was of them and all that good stuff. He had a child, Chani, and he was at first suspicious. Now, he did not fully believe in the Fremen prophecies. He thought it was superstition. But he also was born into this culture, so he had this taught to him from a very young age. So even when he started to see the signs in Paul, like he will know your ways as if born into them, like with the still suit scene, he started to believe. He started to think of Paul very differently, and he started to respect Duke Leto and all that other good stuff. He tried to take a neutral stance. He was not on the Empire side. He's always ever been on the Fremen side. But he's trying to keep the Fremen safe and all that stuff. It was, I believe, it was Kynes' plan, or Kynes' father's plan, to bribe the Guild so that the Guild would not install satellites or any of that stuff onto Arrakis, so nobody could check out the southern hemisphere of Arrakis from space and anything like that, so they could be free to try to make southern Arrakis a lot more habitable, plants and all sorts of civilization and stuff, so that they could hide that stuff. They were bribing the Space Guild with spice for that stuff, because he who controls the spice controls Arrakis, and the Fremen control the spice, and he wanted to make sure that the Harkonnens were not in control of the spice. And he was very interesting. His plans, his motivations, it was very well drawn out in the book. In this movie, we see maybe 2 scenes with Dr. Kynes. The one scene where Kynes takes Leto out on the tour of a sandcrawler to learn how spice is gathered. That's changed a fair bit, by the way. The carryall, which is a big machine that picks up the sandcrawler, that picks up the spice, it picks that thing up when there's worm sign and flies it away to safety before the worm can swallow it up. In the movie, the carryall is there, but it is old equipment, and it's faulty, it's broken, and they had to leave the crawler to be swallowed up by the sandworm. In the book, the carryall itself isn't anywhere to be found. It was sabotage, and the crawler is lost because the carryall was not there to pick it up. It's all about Harkonnen's sabotage. There's another big plot line that the movie's cut, by the way. There is a plot line where Leto is aware that Arrakis is a plan to betray him, plan to get him killed, and he's trying to make plans within plans within plans to stay on top of that. And he knows there's a traitor amongst him, but he doesn't exactly know who. And the book right away says that it is Dr. Yue. We know it's Yue from the beginning, but what makes this so interesting is how everybody comes to the conclusions that they come to. And they think of Yue at first, but they say it couldn't be Yue. Yue has imperial conditioning, and so the film just had to maybe make a sentence or 2 of dialogue to explain what imperial conditioning is and why they shouldn't suspect Dr. Yue. But I understand why this plotline was dropped, because it could probably be a movie in and of itself, a film length, which is why Part 1 should have been its own 2.5-hour film. Then ended with Leto dying, or something like that. Ended with Leto dying, and you could have had a 2.5-hour film of that, and the roughly hour length of stuff that happened after Leto died. You could have used that hour to do the Harkonnen spy plotline, and add the dinner scene in. There's a dinner scene, a very, very interesting dinner scene that the miniseries also added in, but the book version has the best dinner scene. And there is a dinner scene where Leto calls on all of the noble rich people of Arrakis, the businessmen and all of that stuff in the northern cities, and he calls them over for a big banquet dinner. Dr. Kynes is there. There's a lot of dialogue and discussion. It's a perfect time to dump a bunch of exposition and knowledge of this planet onto both the reader. That's why that chapter was there, to drop a bunch of exposition, but it's also a great place to drop a bunch of exposition for viewers, so people can talk and just talk to each other, and we get to learn about all of the intrigue. Unfortunately, that scene was cut, if it was ever planned to be used to begin with. And so that's another big portion of Dr. Kynes that we don't get to see. We only get to see that one scene with the carry-all scene with the Dr. Leto tour guide. And then the next scene we see of Dr. Kynes is where Kynes and Duncan Idaho pick up Paul and Jessica, take them to an abandoned ecological research center. And there the Harkonnens and Sardaukar track them down, and Dr. Kynes dies. That's all we get. We don't learn anything about Liet being the prophet leader of Arrakis. We don't learn anything about that. We just get to see Kynes say, "Oh, I'm Fremen. I know the ways." That's it. That's all you get. That's an insult to the character of Dr. Kynes. I'm sorry, but that is an insult to Dr. Kynes. He was fantastic in the book. He was fascinating. I wanted to know everything, even more about him, and they gave you more than enough information about Dr. Kynes in the book. And we got enough information about him in the miniseries, so much to say that I suggest you watch the miniseries, because it is the most faithful to the book, because it had the most runtime to discuss all of the major events in 3 separate parts, in 3 separate movies, for 3 separate parts of the So yeah, Dr. Kynes is a major point of contention. I really don't like what they did with Kynes in this movie. I really don't. You know, I watched this first before I read this, and I loved Dr. Kynes in this. We got to learn plenty about him in this. And they completely scrapped that, and that also bothered me. Duncan Idaho, he's fine. They added a couple scenes with him to make him a little bit more badass. That's fine. Leto, he's fine. Ultimately, he's fine. I just wish they added the Imperial spy plot with him. That would have been a lot better. And I really wish they would have added more scenes with Leto and Jessica discussing Leto's father. Paul's grandfather was more of a ruthless warrior, a ruthless matador, a person who made a lot of difficult decisions that ended in a lot of people's deaths. He had to make a lot of hard choices in life, and Paul, near the end of the book, reminded Jessica more of the grandfather and less of the father. So I really wish they would have explored that a little bit more, but Leto, in and of itself, he was fine. Jessica and Paul are great. The actors are perfect choices for them. The only thing I would change is make Paul more knowledgeable with his prescience, and maybe make a scene with Jessica knowing about the Fremen prophecy, knowing about the Bene Gesserit missionary projectiva, and trying to manipulate that for her own gains. I really wish they would have explored that a little bit more, and how she should have taught Paul how they should use the Fremen for this. And then Leto is also telling Paul desert power. Both parents are telling them to use the Fremen for his own gains. I really liked Gurney, but I don't like that they got rid of half of his character, essentially. Half of Gurney is missing from this movie. Half of him. And kind of, we don't really see too much of this other half of Gurney in the other adaptations either, so that's unfortunate. Gurney in the books is more of a minstrel warrior poet. He is a warrior poet type of character. He's one of the greatest fighters in the galaxy, rivaling Duncan Idaho. He's one of the greatest fighters, and that part of Gurney gets translated pretty well into all versions of him, if in the film adaptations, but there's a version of Gurney that is more philosophical. He's more spiritual. He's very intelligent with the ways of minstrels. He has a baliset, which is an instrument that you can play, like a string instrument. He plays that. He makes a lot of songs. He does improvise lyrics all the time for various moods and occasions. And both Paul and Jessica are very fond of these songs that Gurney would play for them. And he would play quite a few of them in the book, and you get to read all of the lyrics that he composed, and they're very, very well thought out. They're very, very introspective, and it's a part of the character that I feel is missed. I feel like that needed to be added in so that we get to see more of that side of Gurney, to see more of the philosophical side of him, so that he can offer more to these characters other than just grizzled warrior. Because God Duncan is he's also a grizzled warrior, and we kind of don't really see too much differentiation between the two characters here, and I feel that's lost. And Chani, I've already said how she is completely ruined in these versions. Now, while I say she's completely ruined, I say she's completely ruined for the Chani from the book. As an actress, as a character in this, she's fine. She's fine. If you wrote this to be a completely different character, not associated with Paul at all, I wouldn't have even noticed that she wasn't Chani, because she isn't Chani and all that stuff. They don't really make too much notion that she is Stilgar's niece. They don't make too much notion that she is the daughter of Dr. Kynes, and she would have a lot of knowledge of Imperial society through Dr. Kynes. Dr. Kynes would have taught her about ecology. Dr. Kynes would have taught her about the Imperial ways. Dr. Kynes would have taught her a very great many things. She would be a little bit of a neutral, politically neutral aspect in both Fremen and Imperial ways. She would not be fanatical in the zealotry, but she would be privy to knowing that would be the best way to give peace and prosperity to her people, to help rid them of the Harkonnens and the Empire and all that stuff, is for Paul to lead them to victory. There's a scene in the book that is very important. It's also in the miniseries, where in part 2, like right after Paul kills Jamis, in the few months after that, he's starting to rise up to be Muad'Dib. He's getting a lot of followers, but there are a lot of people that still don't like him, that are wanting to challenge him, to challenge the Muad'Dib and fight him. And Paul learns that Chani learned that one of the fighters had challenged Paul, so she challenged that fighter to Umtal, which is ritualistic combat to the death. And when Paul learned that Chani had killed this person in his name, he was very upset at this. And Chani tells him that when the other Fremen learn that Chani, who was trained by Paul, had killed one of their warriors, that less people would challenge him in the future. She believed in the Muad'Dib. She believed in Paul. She followed that. And that support for Paul as a partner, as a lover, as an almost wife, as a mother to their child, it is missing in the Denis Villeneuve films. It is completely missing. It is devoid. And their chemistry is completely absent. You don't feel the chemistry here at all. You can see that Timothy is trying. He's really trying to have some chemistry here, but the Zendaya does not have the chemistry. She doesn't have chemistry with these with him, and that's very unfortunate. It's very sad to see, because Chani is a very interesting character, and I feel like you could explore her in the role that she played here and not change her too much, but just expand on the role that she had as being a grounding force for Paul. And another one of the biggest changes that they had for Chani, in part 2, Paul asks Chani what her Fremen name is, her secret name is, and Chani says her name is Sahaya, which means Desert Spring, and she hates the name because it's all religious aspects and yada yada yada. Oh, but there's a moody little edgy ace with a zoo. And so Paul says, oh, if you don't like that word, then I don't like it either. I had to pause there I watched part 2 before reading the book, and at first I knew nothing of what Sahaya meant. I had no idea what it meant. So when I didn't read the book, it didn't bother me. But then now that I read the book, I had to pause it because of how much that bothered me. Because of how much of a significance the word Sahaya has. Not just to Chani, but to Paul. To their relationship, to their love. Sahaya was not Chani's chosen name. It was a term of endearment that Paul gave to Chani. The term Sahaya in Fremen means springtime, desert springtime. It also is a form of paradise, since, spring on Arrakis, it's a big desert place. You don't really have a spring. The place doesn't have a spring. So spring on Arrakis would literally be a paradise. It would literally be a heaven, right? And so when Paul calls Chani his Sahaya, he is calling her his paradise. She is the grounding force that keeps him from the jihad. And that is something that is lost in these films. It is very lost. And the version of Chani that we get is a little bit more moody, a little bit more snooty, a little bit more prudish. It's a little bit more obvious that this is the character. This is, don't do the Chani, don't do the jihad, don't be the killer leader man, don't embrace the prophecy, don't do that, no. And it's a little bit too in your face, and I didn't really appreciate that. And the Sahaya thing completely ruined. It's completely ruined. Because I actually thought that was very beautiful when I read that in this book. I thought it was one of the most beautiful things when they have this union. And the Water of Life ceremony, it's very different in the movie as it is in the book. In the book, when Jessica imbues the Water of Life, she takes in the water in a ceremony of sorts. Many Fremen are gathered here in this big cavern. It's not just with a bunch of Fremen waiting outside. Everybody's inside the cavern. It's a big cavern. Everybody's in there watching this ceremony where Jessica imbues the Water of Life, and the Reverend Mother passes at the same time, and her consciousness enters Jessica's into this big psychedelic drug trip thing. And Jessica changes the Water of Life right before in front of everybody. She changes it. She survives. She transforms the poison, and then she enables the water as safe to drink by the other Fremen. And so the water is the changed water, which is still very psychedelic properties. It is passed amongst the Fremen. Paul is expected to drink from it. Chani is expected to drink from it, and so they all drink from it. Then they enter this sort of hive mind, shared consciousness, psychedelic space. And so Chani pulls Paul aside because she feels overwhelmed by Paul's presence, by Paul's mind, and she fears that everybody else would be consumed by Paul's mind as well if they were in his presence for too long. So she guides him, she takes him away into somewhere private, and there she is encompassed by Paul's consciousness, and she gets to see inside Paul's head. She sees all of the prescient memories that Paul has had of her. And prescience for Paul basically is kind of like potential future sight. He's not having like future sight. He's not seeing the future. He's seeing potential futures. He's seeing potential paths, potential outcomes, potential alternate pathways. And that's one thing in the movie that I really liked, is that he got to see some scenes with Jamis where he was actually telling him some things and helping him out. And that's a potential path that Paul could have taken, but the choices and actions that led him to the moment of fighting Jamis ended in him having to kill him instead. So that was a pretty good thing the movie did, but it really messed this moment up for me. In this psychedelic shared moment, Chani is consumed by Paul's love for her, and she accepts him. She sees the future that Paul has seen in the prescient memories. She has seen their child that they have together. She's seen it. She's felt the love Paul has for his child and for her, and she is consumed by this amazing moment of a lifetime experience in but a single moment. It is amazing to read, to experience that. And that is where he calls her his Sahaya, and that's where she accepts the term, and that's where they become unionized together. That night they probably do the nasty and all that stuff at that night of the ceremony. All that's changed in the book. All that's gone. There's none of that. No psychedelic. None of that. It's all gone. So you don't get to experience any of that in the movie, and that's very disappointing to me. It's very, very disappointing to me. I don't know why they shy away from showing that. I don't know why they shy away from showing genuine and true love between two people like that. Because I think that's beautiful. I do. I think that type of union was very beautiful to behold. And, yeah, they really insulted the character of Chani because I don't think she was just subservient to Paul. She had her own agency. Like, she killed that Fremen challenger who challenged Paul. Like, she had her own agency. She had her own plan. She knew what to do when Paul drank the water of life. She knew that Paul would do this. She knew. When Jessica didn't know Paul would do this. Jessica was not the one who told Paul to drink the water of life. You know, in the movie, she tells him to drink the water of life to see what she sees and all that stuff. She's the one who instills this plan into Paul. No, Paul came up with this idea all on his own. And Chani, knowing Paul, intrinsically knowing him, ends up telling Jessica exactly why Paul did this. Because Jessica didn't know. But Chani, who knew Paul better than the mother knew her son, ended up explaining this and knew exactly how to bring him back. And that scene, which a version of it gets made into the movie, and Chani and Jessica are fighting each other, and they hate each other, and it just makes me angry that how much they ruined this character, and it's just I didn't really appreciate it, because I think the cautionary tale of Paul becoming this warlord who would have a galactic jihad across the galaxy ending in 61 billion deaths. I think that cautionary tale is very accurately depicted in the book. It was very easily understood. I understood it immediately. Paul does not go on a hero's journey. He goes on a tragedy. He's a very tragic Shakespearean type of character. It's a very Shakespearean type of story in general. And anybody with knowledge of those types of journeys that a Shakespearean character could go on, which may mimic a hero's journey, it's a very tragic end often. And that's where Paul experiences this as well. There are two moments where Paul changes from the Paul that we knew from the first half of the book into the Paul that we know in the second half of the book. And the first moment is the water of life moment. Paul meets Gurney, right? He finally meets Gurney again, and the Fremen are slaughtering half of Gurney's smugglers before Paul gives the sign for them to stop after seeing that Gurney is among them. And Gurney is a little bit upset that half of his unit is killed, and Paul just shrugs. He just says, "That is our way. We didn't know you guys were here. We didn't know you were among them. It's just the way." Paul has gone native and all of that stuff. He just accepts that these deaths are there. It's just no hard feelings. It's just that's what it is. And Gurney is surprised by this. He's a little bit worried about this, but he's still more than happy to see Paul is alive. And then Paul takes Gurney to meet his mother, to meet Jessica. And Gurney has believed the lies of the Harkonnens. This is all about the scrapped spy plot. Let me explain the spy plot to you, because at this point of the story, this entire spy plot, I think, needed to be in the movie. This needed to be a trilogy, okay? And the spy plot needed to be in part 1 of the movie. It needed to be explored more with Hawat's character in part 2 of the movie. Hawat is missing in part 2 completely. Thufir Hawat, who is Duke Leto's mentat, he's not even on the cover here because he has such a severely reduced role. And that pissed me off because I really liked Hawat in the book. He had a very expanded character. The Harkonnen spy plot basically is Jessica uncovers a Braille signal left by another Bene Gesserit sister in a greenhouse room in the palace on Arrakis, that there is a spy amongst Duke Leto's house. and they are going to kill Duke Leto and all the others, and Paul has an assassination attempt on his life, so Paul comes into the room and talks to Jessica, and then Jessica brings in Thufir Hawat, tells him about the spy plot, and then Thufir Hawat tells Leto about the spy plot, and then he eventually comes to the conclusion that he thinks that Leto's concubine, Lady Jessica, could be the spy. Because he doesn't like the Bene Gesserit at all. Hawat doesn't like Bene Gesserit witches and all that stuff. Leto dismisses Jessica as being a spy completely, but he realizes that the Harkonnens want him to suspect Jessica. And so he says, let it be known that I may suspect Jessica. Even though I do not, I want the Harkonnens to think that I have fallen for their trick. Even though I want you to continue looking for the real spy. He wants to make the spy, who's actually amongst the Harkonnens, feel complacent and feel safe, thinking that the Duke doesn't suspect them when he's still looking for them. It's very, very plans within plans. I really loved that moment. I love those chapters. It's very, very good. And of course, the best parts of the book are cut from the movies. I hate that. I hate that. And so, Leto never gets to tell Jessica that he never suspected her, so he ends up telling Paul. He tells Paul that he never suspected Jessica at all, and that he has always loved her, and one of his greatest regrets was that he never married her. He tells Paul this, and he wants Paul to tell Jessica this if something were to happen to Leto. And something ends up happening to Leto, and Paul ends up telling Jessica in the tent on their first night in the desert. He ends up telling Jessica that all of the things that Leto never got to say to her, because he wants to console her, because life in the desert's going to be a little bit harder, and he can't afford to have her grieving right now. He can't even grieve, and he hates that he can't feel anything for the death of his father right now, because duty prevents him from feeling weakness at this moment. And it is at this moment, on their first night in the desert, where Paul realizes that he and Jessica have Harkonnen blood in them, and that she is the daughter of Baron Harkonnen. He realizes this now. In the movies, he realizes this after drinking the water of life way, way late in the film, and I don't like that at all. I really didn't like that at all. So I think it was done better in the book. I think the book does almost everything better. The only things I would say that the movie does a little bit better is I'm trying to think about it, because I really liked this book far more than the movies. Paul riding the sandworm, and the depiction of Fremen behind him, and the little tent that they had for Lady Jessica, I liked that. I liked those. I liked the look of the worms. I liked the little teeth, the many teeth in the mouths of the worms. I liked that. I liked the spaceships. I liked the costumes. I liked the look of the still suit a lot. There's not too much else. There's so much that they changed from the book, to the point that this movie, these two movies, are its own separate continuity, its own separate story, almost. And that when you read this book, you would get a completely different experience. You would know the highlights, you would know the bullet points, because the bullet points are in the movies, but everything else is different. Everything else was done differently in the books. In the book. And Thufir Hawat, his role is very, very reduced. He dies off screen in the movie, and he's never shown again. What ends up happening to him, it's actually shown in the Lynch movie and in the miniseries, if I remember correctly. The Harkonnens capture Hawat, and Hawat believes that Jessica is the traitor. He never suspected Dr. Yue, because his logic prevents him from suspecting that somebody who underwent imperial conditioning like Dr. Yue could be the traitor, so he thinks it's Jessica. And the Baron allows Hawat to think it's Jessica, and he ends up bringing Thufir Hawat on to be his new mentat after Peter de Vries dies, to the poison that Leto had. And another thing that's different is that the Baron escaped Leto's poison breath. He escaped it completely. He was never wounded by it, like all these versions had him wounded by it and whatnot. But no, the Baron escaped the room. Everybody else died in the room, but the Baron escaped, and he was perfectly fine immediately. He didn't need to undergo any healing treatments or nothing like that. He just escaped. And he ends up capturing Thufir Hawat and makes him his own Mentat. He poisons him with a poison that's going to be in Hawat's system forever. And he'll have to take an antidote every single day to live. If he misses a day, he will be dead. And so that's how he traps Hawat into his services to continue to have his loyalty. And Hawat's plans within plans within plans is so fantastic to see. Hawat is conspiring with Feyd-Rautha to kill Baron Harkonnen. He's conspiring with Baron Harkonnen to try to take control of Arrakis by installing Rabban there, and then sacrificing Rabban to install Feyd-Rautha onto Arrakis as its savior or whatnot. He's making all sorts of plans within plans to try to get Baron Harkonnen and Lady Jessica killed. He is fantastic. He is fantastic, and he is sorely missed in the movie, because he's completely missing from part 2. Hawat is the one who told Feyd-Rautha to have one of the gladiators not be drugged, so that he could fight an undrugged gladiator. And the Baron had no idea that this gladiator was undrugged. And so the Baron thought that this was an assassination attempt on Feyd-Rautha. And Feyd would overcome this attempt. He'd let everybody in the crowd think that this was an assassination attempt, but he was just too good of a badass that he beat even an undrugged gladiator, and everybody cheered. And then he had this gladiator buried with honor as a warrior's respect, and the crowd cheered even more. He knew how to win over the people. He was very tactical and calculating. And I liked the way Feyd-Rautha was utilized in part 2. I really liked that, but I feel he needed to be utilized a little bit better. He needed to be, and he also needed to have Count Fenring. He was completely missing from the movies. His wife, the Countess, who is a Bene Gesserit sister, she was there. And the plan was that the Count and the wife were talking about Feyd-Rautha, and they were talking about Paul Atreides and the breeding program, and how, if anything happened to Feyd-Rautha, because they think that Feyd-Rautha was probably going to be disposed of soon, but they wanted to preserve the bloodline. So the Count told the wife to go and mate with Feyd-Rautha, because the Count is a neutered, he's a eunuch, he's not, and he's fine with his wife doing these things. It's all he knows full well about the Bene Gesserit ways. So Count Fenring lets his wife go out and do that, and she seduces Feyd-Rautha, and immediately upon meeting this Countess, but right before the gladiator fight, Feyd-Rautha meets Baron Harkonnen and the Count Fenring and his wife, and he immediately starts flirting with the wife. He just immediately fawns over her. And so that is how we know that Feyd is weak to the wiles of the opposite sex. He can be controlled in this way. If anything were to happen to him, the bloodline would be secured in the Countess's child, which would be a daughter, and inducted in the Bene Gesserit to do as they will anywhere else. So I think Fenring's axing is missed. I think that should have been added in to add more complex scheming and natures with the Harkonnens, because I think we need more scenes with the Harkonnens. Most of the scenes we had with the Harkonnens in the book are cut from the movies. I'm surprised at that. And of course, Rabban, Beast Rabban's character, he only has one chapter where he has a speaking dialogue role, and so every scene we have of Rabban is made up. After the scene where Baron Harkonnen wants Rabban to squeeze Arrakis, that's the only scene where Rabban actually has a speaking dialogue role in the book. So every single scene we see of Rabban after that and before that is made up for that movie. There is a lot of stuff made up for part 2. Almost half of the movie is made up for the movie itself and not part of the book, and I really didn't like that. I thought there was more than enough material to cover everything in the book. You just didn't need to cut things from the book. If you didn't cut things from the book, you would have time to adapt things from the book and not have to make up your own storylines. that let's talk about the next major point of contention I have. And it's something that Denis Villeneuve made as a creative decision, and I disagree with his creative decision. I respect his decision, but I disagree with it. And the decision that he made was to compress time so that the entire Dune story took place within an 8-month span, which I don't think is believable. It almost makes you think that these Fremen could have taken over the Harkonnens at any time without Paul. The only reason that they weren't was because the tribes were not united and that they needed a leader or whatever. And so in the book, Paul ends up teaching the Fremen. He teaches Chani. He even teaches Chani how to fight in the ways of Duncan Idaho and Gurney Halleck. He was trained by two of the greatest warriors in the galaxy, and so he was using his training. He was teaching the Fremen the fighting styles and tactics of the worlds that they were not privy to, so that they can know how to fight Sardaukar better, and they know how to kill Harkonnens better. They know how the tactics and all the guerrilla tactics and all that stuff. The Vataken ended up being Paul's personal guard. They were very fanatical to him, and Paul personally picked people who were fanatical to him so that they could be more easily controlled and all of that stuff. It was all part of a scheme to use the Fremen, but he ended up liking the Fremen through Chani, and he wanted to save them, so he would give Arrakis to the Fremen. He would get the Empire and the Harkonnens off the planet. He would become their duke, because he's gone full native and all that stuff. And so he teaches them over a 2-year period. He teaches them how to fight. And over a 2-year period, that makes sense, that he could teach an army of thousands and thousands how to fight. But over an 8-month span, I'm sorry, you would not be able to teach everybody all this stuff. The plans that you would make would not work all that well. It's just so many changes were made that when I try to explain them or try to justify them, I end up coming up short because I don't know how you would justify 8 months over 2 years needed here. One of the major things that takes Paul towards the path of the Jihad is the death of his son, the death of Leto the Elder. Paul and Chani have a child very early on. They're very young, but they fall in love with the spice water ceremony. They fall so madly. They're smitten with each other. It's like puppy dog love. They're completely smitten. And they have a child immediately. And this child is named Leto. We get to see him in the miniseries. And Leto is Paul's heir. He would become the next Duke of Arrakis, if not even the next Emperor, if Paul's plans come into fruition. So he cares very deeply for his son. And during the Fremen attack on Arrakeen, on the Sardaukar, there was a Sardaukar raid in the south where they killed Leto. They killed Paul's son. And they captured Aaliyah, his sister. They captured her and took her to the palace. And it is Aaliyah who kills Baron Harkonnen. She wanted to be captured because she did not want to face Paul and tell him that his son was dead. He wanted Paul to learn about this so that he could take his rage to the Harkonnens, to the Emperor, because that rage would fuel his jihad. There are so many plans and layers. Everybody has their own plans within plans, and everybody's working with and against each other. People who are allied might be working with different plans, and those plans within plans may be against one another, like Paul was making plans within plans to avoid the jihad. Jessica was making plans within plans to survive and install Paul back upon the throne. Chani was making plans within plans when she killed the Fremen, one of her own kin, to prevent future kin from being slaughtered by Paul, to challenge him and all of that stuff. Kynes was making plans within plans to make Arrakis green again, but working with the Empire to keep the Empire from interfering with Arrakis too much and making bribes to the Spice Guild. Everybody was making plans within plans. We don't get to see too much of that. We don't get to see too much of this in-depth, complex world. And it's a shame. It really is. I genuinely think this should have been a trilogy. Because this is 3 parts. This movie is 3 parts. The miniseries. They're all film length, each part. And they each tell a part within the Dune book. Like, I don't really remember which exact page is where it shows part 2 and part 3. But this is 3 parts, 3 books, if you will, in one. And if you're going to make a film adaptation, and you know you can't adapt the whole story in one film, and it feels even rushed kind of in these 2 films. Like, the first film feels rushed. I didn't actually feel the runtime at all, honestly. This film is how many minutes long? 155 minutes. It's an hour and a half. No, it's 2.5 hours. You don't feel that. I don't feel that. I didn't feel it. It felt like 90 minutes to me. It went by so fast. There was so much going on. And they were condensing. Roughly, I want to say, if I'm just going to ballpark figure it, they condensed this much of the book into part 1. And all of this is part 2. Which is why part 2 has so much stuff made up for the film that wasn't in the book, because they were adapting such a little portion of it. If you were to, say, maybe cut the runtime down to 2 hours, or maybe just keep it to 2.5 hours. Actually, I think you should keep it to 2.5 hours, and adapt just part 1 of the book, part 1 ends with Duke Leto's death, and Paul and Jessica spending their first night out in the desert, and Paul realizing that they're Harkonnens, and they're making their plans to go meet the Fremen and all of that stuff. That's where part 1 ends. I think if you ended this movie there, you could have used that extra runtime to add in a bunch of stuff, and maybe even make it to... You might be able to even condense some of the added scenes in, like Duncan Idaho has an added scene in that you don't really need. There's a couple other added scenes in that you don't really need, and really condense it a little bit so that you can add in the dinner scene, add in Kynes properly, make Kynes' character properly done, and add the Harkonnen spy plot line, give Thufir Hawat a bigger role, the role that he deserves, that he had in the book. If you did that, the first movie would have been a hit. It would have went off without a hitch. And then you could now scrap a lot of the characters that got killed off, such as Duke Leto, he was killed, and I think Gurney was... I don't think Gurney shows up in part 2. I think he shows up in part 3. I could be wrong. I have to recheck that, but I don't feel like doing that right now. But I think you could skip having Gurney in the second film to save cast members so that you don't have a bloated cast, because a lot of characters die in between each portions. Like Duncan Idaho dies in part 2, Kynes dies in part 2, so you don't need to worry about writing for them for part 3. You add in Gurney Halleck for part 3, and it's just a musical chairs of characters. Maybe for the second movie, it starts with Paul and Jessica going to meet the Fremen, and Paul becoming part of the Fremen society, the Amtal ritual combat with Jamis, going into Sietch Tabor, where Stilgar is de facto leader. There's no Council of Elders where they are talking to Stilgar as if he was subservient to them. No, Stilgar is de facto leader of Sietch Tabor. So his word is law unless somebody challenged him to Amtal. But Stilgar is the best warrior there, so nobody would challenge him to Amtal. And what else? You could end it roughly right before we meet Gurney Halleck. Have the Water of Life ceremony with the psychedelic stuff. Have Chani and Paul fall madly in love. That courtship, I do agree, would be very difficult to show, because in the book, it's very much implied that it's like a psychedelic shared hive mind moment where these two consciousnesses meld together to become one, and they realize their overwhelming love for one another. And it was a very beautiful thing to read, but I agree that it would be very difficult to show on a screen, but I think you could do it. I believe in you. I believe in the genius of filmmaking and filmmakers. I believe you could have done that properly. And then with part 3, we begin part 3 with the 2-year time skip, so that we can introduce Fate Raltha in part 3, and that's just, and have Paul take the Water of Life, have him announce the Warpath, because as soon as he takes the Water of Life, he realizes that the Emperor has come to Arrakis. The great houses are all surrounding Arrakis. The Empire is landing in Arrakeen, the capital city, and so this now is the time to launch his attack, and so he goes to do that. I think you could have done this in 3 films. Each film should be about 2 to 2.5 hours long. This could have been your Lord of the Rings. This could have been your new science fiction Lord of the Rings if you played your cards correctly here. This could have been a trilogy. It really would have worked. I really believed it would have worked without changing barely anything from the book. Without changing barely anything, I think you could have made this work. I definitely think it's possible. I definitely do. The movies as we got them now. I'm leaving a lot of changes out, by the way. I'm leaving a lot of things out, because it's already an hour. I'm tired of just being disappointed and sounding disappointed. Because, funnily enough, before I read the Dune books, when I watched this first Dune movie, I loved it. I loved the first Dune movie. The only thing I had a problem with was Kynes. I didn't really like what they did with Kynes. I think he was perfectly done here. I don't think you needed to change him at all. I think what you did here, you could have just done here, and it would have been fine. You didn't really need to change him at all. But outside of that, I thought the first one was done really well. And then I had a lot of problems with part 2. The first half of it, especially the courtship of Chani's character and the way they wrote Chani. Even before reading the book, the Chani that I knew from this was definitely not like the Chani from this. And I really preferred the Chani from this to this one. The Chani from this, from Lynch's Dune, we barely get to see her at all, so we don't need to worry about that. We don't even need to discuss her in that one. But the Chani in the miniseries is very much in support with Paul. And we don't even get to read the very important line that Jessica says to Chani at the end when Paul gets into a marriage with Princess Irulan. There's the final little writing bit here in the book that I would like to talk about. Let's try to find it. Here we go. We see here. We must obey the forms, yet that princess shall have no more of me than my name. No child of mine, nor touch, nor softness of glance, nor instant of desire. Paul is trying to reassure Chani that this is just a political marriage. And Chani knows about this. She's a little bit bummed out about this, but she knows this, and she has to accept this. Chani says, "So you say now." She's a little bit unsure about this, and then Jessica comes up behind Chani. They're a lot closer in the book than they are in the movies. And Jessica says, "Do you know so little of my son? See that princess standing there, so haughty and confident. They say she has pretensions of a literary nature. Let us hope she finds solace in such things. She'll have little else." A bitter laugh escaped to Jessica. "Think on it, Chani. That princess will have the name, yet she'll live as less than a concubine, never to know a moment of tenderness for the man to whom she's bound. While we, Chani, we who carry the name of concubine, history will call us wives." That That's missing from this movie. It's missing, and I feel that's a very big travesty, a big crime to the Dune to omit that. It was added in here. I believe it was also added in here. Like, these guys understood what it meant, and what that last paragraph of the book, what that last thing meant. They understood what it meant. It wouldn't work here, because this is not Chani. This is not the Chani of the book. This is not the Chani of the story that Frank Herbert wrote. This is not his Chani. This is Denis Villeneuve's Chani. This is a very different character. This is a very different Dune. This is a very different story. And I can respect that from an artistic thing, but from a Dune perspective, you could have adapted it the way the book adapted it, the way the book wrote it. You could have not made these changes. They didn't need to be made. They really didn't. Most of the changes that you made, you didn't need to make. You just needed to depict the story the way the book depicted it. And it would have been fine. That might just be my personal bias seeping in, but ironically, and I'm going to say this ironically, I watched this first, right? I watched this first. Then I watched the Denis Villeneuve movies. Then I watched the David Lynch Dune. I had watched all of the film adaptations of Dune before I read the book. So naturally, I would probably be biased and say, hey, I like this version of Dune most. And ironically, I do like this version of Dune more than the other two film adaptations. I love the weirdness of Lynch's Dune, though. I think the weirdness of Lynch's Dune accentuates the weirdness of the book's Dune a whole lot better than Denis Villeneuve's Dune does. So much so to say that I would say the best version of Dune is the book, the best film adaptation is this Dune, followed by this Dune, followed by part 1 of this Dune, and then this Dune is on the bottom, the absolute bottom. But yeah, that's my condensed rant about Dune. I have finally experienced the Dune book. I have finally read and finished the Dune book. The Dune book is a masterpiece. It is one of the best works of science fiction ever written, and I recommend it to everyone. Anyone who is even remotely interested in the movies, watch the movies, but then read the book. Read it. Cover to cover. Read Dune.